No? Okay. Anyway, so we'll start for today. So we'll be continuing from where we stopped last time. I think we stopped at fragments, and this is going to be the final lecture on style as such. Next session would be a little um, longer, because we are going to take up now, we have looked at all these structures and styles and other things. We should now be able to look at how we do them when we are supposed to be taking a professional writing, by which I mean we'll look at how we use them in emails and letters and more specific cases of professional writing. So next week we'll maybe deal with two things. I'll see if the time permits, then we can take more. But as of now, we'll be looking at emails and letters specifically for next week. Okay. So let's see if all these things that we have looked at comes in handy for us in the next session. So just to let you know, it will be a slightly longer session, not very long, but still longer than what we have in our usual pace. Okay. So we'll begin for today. So this is going to be the last one that we'll be dealing with in how to write. Okay. Now the next week onwards, we'll actually write, then just looking at how to. All right. So we stopped at effective fragments last week. And we'll look at so all those that we have discussed in the last session, the last two classes, they were about style and dissipation of style between sentences. Now, the same thing can also be followed. There are constructions and structures that we can take up, which happens within the sentence, right? So this arrangement can be done both within the sentence and between the sentences. We've already had a look at how that can be done between the sentences. In today's class, we'll look at a couple of things which would help us do the same thing, achieve the same purpose within the sentence. Okay. So when we talk about style within the sentence, we would look at them under three rubrics, as you see on the screen, namely emphasis, clarity, and consistency. It's better view now, right? So we look at three rubrics. So as I mentioned, emphasis, clarity, and consistency, which means we are going to see how using certain styles or certain structures and constructions within the sentences or arrangement of certain constructions within the sentences would help you achieve three things, mainly emphasis, clarity, and consistency. Okay, that's how we are going to look at these things. So we look at each of under each of these rubrics, we'll see how we can place, rephrase, and rearrange what we have written to achieve the three things that I just mentioned. Okay, so we'll move on. The first one is emphasis. Okay, so how do you achieve emphasis while arranging, rephrasing things within a sentence? Or how can you write a sentence in order to achieve more emphasis? Okay, so there are four main constructions that you can follow in order to do that. The first one is referred to as the end focus. We'll look at what each of them are in a moment, but just to begin with, four of them. The first one is called end focus. The second is front focus. The third one is their structures and cleft sentences. And the fourth one is, of course, parenthetic expressions. So we'll look at all four of them one by one and understand what we mean by it. Okay. So what is end focus? Okay. Now, what does end focus mean? If you can have a look at the screen. End focus means placing the more important information towards the end. If you remember from the previous session, I think I've mentioned about placing things towards the end in order to give it more significance, right? Remember, we talked about, if you had, listened to the earlier session, then I had talked about this, that you can place things at the end, the whole sentence, the sentence that carries the most important information towards the end, in order to build up the suspense, to build up some sort of drama, to keep the reader hooked to your writing. Now, similarly, you can do the same thing within a sentence. You can keep the most important information towards the end in order to emphasize the importance of that, right? Like, look at the example here. The first one, although they were not completely happy with it, the committee members adopted her wording of the resolution. That's the first sentence. And the second one is the committee members adopted her wording of the resolution, although they were not completely happy with it, right? So basically, this is the same sentence. What they have done is they've reversed the order. Now, based on what comes at the end, the part which is emphasized or the part which is highlighted becomes different. In the first sentence, what comes at the end is the committee members adopted her wording of the resolution. So the focus is more on the decision. Okay. So the more important part, the part that sentence wants to highlight to its reader is that, see, this is what the decision was. What was the decision? The committee members adopted her wording of the resolution. So the focus, the person who wrote the sentence wanted the readers focus more on the decision than on anything else. Whereas in the second sentence, the committee members adopted her wording of the resolution, although they were not completely happy with it. Now, what is happening in this sentence? The emphasis intended is on how they felt. Okay, it's on their feeling rather than on the decision itself. So similarly, when you're writing, based on what you want to emphasize, okay, whether it's a feeling or whether it's a decisions or whatever it is, okay, based on the sentence you write, whatever you want to emphasize can be placed towards the end part of the sentence in order to give it more of an emphasis. Okay. Now the same thing can be done. That's the second point we'll discuss. We can give prominence or significance to something by placing it towards the front as well. You can front something, like in this case. What does front focus mean? That's the second one. Fronting the information to give it greater prominence. Now, in front focus, what happens usually, you don't front the whole clause as such, or the phrase as such. What you do is you front the subject. Okay. So look at this. Marijuana they used occasionally, but cocaine they never touched. Okay. Now, how will you rewrite this sentence if you're asked to? If one of you can respond to this. Marijuana they used occasionally, but cocaine they never touched. Could you try and respond? One of you.
Ma'am, they used marijuana occasionally, but they never touched cocaine.
But they never touched cocaine, right? So what is the difference do you think is between these two sentences? They used marijuana occasionally, but they never touched cocaine, versus marijuana they used occasionally, but cocaine they never touched. What is being given significance? Which part? How would you tabulate both of these sentences based on the significant part or the important part in the sentence? Yeah.
Ma'am, the subject is given more importance in this sentence.
More than the subject, just look at that. Marijuana they used occasionally. So the part that they wanted to emphasize better, or the one which they wanted to make prominent was this, that marijuana was used occasionally. Okay, cocaine they never touched, but the part that they wanted to emphasize better was marijuana. That marijuana was used occasionally, right? So that got fronted, right? That is the whole thing that goes on into the front focus. Okay, now look at the second sentence. Under no circumstances will they permit smoking in public areas. Okay, how can you rearrange this sentence to a normal looking declarative statement? How will you do that? Try doing that. Under no circumstances will they permit smoking in public areas. How can you rearrange this to look like an ordinary sentence without any emphasis? Yeah, no response?
They will not permit smoking in public areas under any circumstances.
They will not permit smoking in public areas under, right, under no.
Under any circumstances.
Under any circumstances, right. So that's how you will write the sentence, right? But then the focus had to be mostly on what under no circumstances. So that got fronted, right? With a major focus on any kind of circumstances, which is trying to focus a bit more on the subject, as Mansuta has mentioned before, right? So what gets prominent here is that no, the part on circumstances, and in the previous sentences, what becomes more prominent is the substance marijuana, right? So the phrase that contained these two got fronted. Okay, get that point? Yes, no? Others, people who are listening, Afrin, Loknath, and others. Is that understood, guys? Then we can move on. Just say yes or no or something so that we know. Yeah. What I was saying is that in both the sentences, the word, the under no circumstances and marijuana they used occasionally, they got fronted because the focus had to be more on marijuana, and in the second case, circumstances, right? So in order to give it more emphasis, they got front focused. That's what the discussion was. And because that had to be fronted, now since that it does not come in isolation, it had a phrase along with it. So the whole phrase or the clause that contained these two subjects were fronted. Okay, that's what this particular thing means. Okay, all right. Okay, I just got a chance to look at the chat. Got your answers. Thank you. So we'll move on. Okay. Wait. All right. Now the third one. So we looked at end focus, we looked at front focus, and now the third type of constructions that you use for achieving better emphasis are their structures and cleft sentences. Have you seen these sentences before? These kind of sentences before? There are no simple solutions. There was no reason to be annoyed. It was human error that caused the explosion. It is the ending that is the weakest part of the novel. Seen these kind of constructions before, right? They're very common kind of sentences in English, right? Their constructions and cleft constructions. Yes. Now they have a special function. There is usually used again when you have to focus on the subject. Okay, so like look at the sentence. There are no simple solutions. What are we referring to? What is there referring to? It's mostly not reference in the sense it lays more emphasis on the subject. That's the simple solutions. Okay, and in the second one, more emphasis on the reason, right? There was no reason to be annoyed. There are no simple solutions. So in both the cases, both cleft structures and their structures, the major function of them is to highlight the main part of the sentence. So if you look at the third sentence, it was human error that caused the explosion. It is the ending that is the weakest part. Both of them are placed right before the major part that needs an emphasis in the sentence. Okay, in the first case it was simple solutions, the second it was reason, the third it was human error, and the fourth one it is the ending, right? So right before each of these things which needed an emphasis, you had placed either a their structure or a cleft structure to increase the emphasis laid on both of them. Okay, you can rewrite all of these sentences as we did with the previous case, but this construction particularly is aimed at improving the emphasis or enhancing the emphasis. Okay, all right. Now, the fourth one, of course, is parenthetic expressions. So if you're speaking, then you use intonations to emphasize what? Emphasize the part that has gone before. If after you speak something, you pause for a while so that your listeners can meditate on the point that you just made, right? Or simply because you want to stress upon it, so you give a break after speaking. Similarly, this can be achieved in writing by the use of punctuations. Okay, I am not going to delve in detail on punctuations because I think you have a full-length video on usage of punctuation. So you can listen to the lecture there. It's a very detailed lecture on uses of punctuation, usage of punctuation. But just to your knowledge, why do we use them? It is to emphasize, right? Emphasize what you have just said or what you have just written, what has gone before, basically. So look at the example. Freud, of course, thought he had discovered the underlying causes of many mental illnesses. So the emphasis is on who. So Freud here, right? So there's a comma after that. The music business is not, in actual fact, an easy business to succeed in, right? So full stop missing. Apologies for that. Could be a typo. The music business is not, in fact, an easy business to succeed in. So in both cases, emphasis in the first one lies on Freud, and the second one, the music business is not. Okay. And how about the second commas that you see? Of course, and in actual fact, what functions do they perform there? The first one is doing the role of the emphasis. What is the second one doing? If you had already heard the lectures on punctuation, you should know. Anybody who wants to respond? I'm just trying to check, that's all, if you know these. If not, no problem. Please go back to the video and check why do you use that comma after of course and in the second statement in actual fact. Okay, you should know these things because the commas that are used, the first comma and the second comma are used for two different purposes. The first one after Freud and in the second sentence after not is for the purpose of emphasis, but the second one that you see there is not for that reason. Okay, if you know it, can you please respond, any one of you? Say yes or no. If your answer is no, I would just ask you to go back to the video and see. Anybody who knows why? Guys, those of you are listening, if you're not able to speak, at least you can respond in the chat. Okay, and those of you can speak, please speak. Any idea? No? Am I still audible to you guys? Still with me? Yes, guys. Okay, I'm audible, but what is the answer to the question? Do you know why this second comma, the function of the second commas? Or if you know, you can talk about it. Else, please look back at your video on punctuation. These things are important, okay? Every comma doesn't have the same meaning. All right, I will not waste a lot of time on that. If you do not, just to your information, they are different. And if you do not know, please refer back to the video, all right? We'll move on. So 4 things to lay emphasis or 4 type of constructions to improve emphasis in your sentences, that is within the sentences. The first one is end focus. Second one is which is where you place the most important information at the end. That is one kind of construction. Then the second one is front focus, wherein you place the important information or the most important subject towards the beginning of the sentence to show that among the various things that is said, this one is the more important one, right? And then the third one, you have their structures and cleft structures, right? What do? Again, they lay more emphasis on the subject. So they immediately precede the subject in order to give it more emphasis, both their constructions and cleft constructions, right? And then the fourth one is, of course, parenthetic expressions. In the case of writing, what we refer to as parenthetic expression is the punctuation, right? All right, so now moving on, we'll go to the second one. So we were discussing on how to improve emphasis within the sentences. Now we're going to the second rubric, which is clarity. Okay. Now we'll talk about how clarity can be achieved in writing through several constructions. The first one is end weight. Now, this is a principle that follows the end focus principle from emphasis, wherein we saw that, you know, to lay more emphasis on something, you can place them at the end of the sentence, within the sentence. So similarly, end weight tells you anything that is longer, any longer structure. Okay, if you have 2 parts, that is one that precedes the verb and the one that follows the verb, which means essentially the subject and the predicative part that follows the verb. Okay, whichever one looks longer to you can be placed at the end, right? And remember, mostly it is always nice to keep your predicate longer than your subject, because longer subjects can cause ambiguity and confusion. So if there is any way to rephrase your sentences in a way where you can keep your subjects shorter, basically the part before the verb shorter, then that should be the best way to write down the sentence. Okay, always keep the longer part for the predicate, and therefore in positioning after the verb. Okay, so anything that follows the verb can be made longer than the one that precedes it, because that is better for retention of meaning and clarity than making your subject part or the one which precedes the verb longer. Okay, that's a general idea. But again, and that is the understanding by which the end weight principle works too, right? So place the longer structures at the end. So look at the sentence. There are the same sentence written in two different ways. Just look at them. The denial of the politicians on the role of climate change as the reason for the several cataclysmic floods is the real problem. Okay. Now, the same sentence can be rewritten as the real problem is the denial of the politicians on the role of climate change as the reason for the several cataclysmic floods. Right. So what we have basically done is we have reversed the order, and not just reversed the order. What we've done is we have made the subject shorter and the predicative part longer. Okay. So this ensures a better clarity of writing than having a longer structure in the beginning. Okay, the main reason is by the time you reach the end of the sentence, you lose out on what exactly has been spoken. So if you keep that part towards the end, the retention of meaning and clarity is better. Okay, like you see in the sentence. We'll look at further examples to illustrate this point. Just look at them. The first one. Einstein's theories have made many important technological developments, which we now take for granted. Okay, granted possible. Einstein's theories have made many important technological developments which we now take for granted possible. So there, it looks like there is something that is out of tune and something that doesn't really give us proper clarity. So we have rewritten the sentence as Einstein's theories have made possible. So the possible has been shifted towards the beginning of the sentence. So Einstein's theories have made possible many important technological developments, which we now take for granted. Okay. Second one, the value of trying to identify the problem and to provide the tools necessary to make the education of these children a success is not questioned. So the first part is the longest one here, right? The one before the verb. So to achieve better clarity, we are going to reverse the order. So no one questions the value of trying to identify the problem and to provide the tools necessary to make the education of these children a success. Okay. Next example, that the recession will be longer, deeper, and more painful than was expected only a few weeks ago is very possible. Again, what do? You reverse it. It is very possible that the recession will be longer, deeper, and more painful than was expected only a few weeks ago, right? You just place the longer part towards the end in order to make it clear. The last one, a special set of symbols to enable the reader to produce a satisfactory pronunciation is used. So what did you do? So you rearranged it to write it as a special set of symbols is used. Okay, so that becomes the subject part. Why? To enable the reader to produce a satisfactory pronunciation. Sounds much better than saying a special set of symbols to enable the reader to produce a satisfactory pronunciation is used. Okay, there is a lot of clumsiness involved. There is lack of clarity, which has been solved by the rewriting of the sentence into the one that you see in front of you, right? A special set of symbols is used to enable the reader to produce a satisfactory pronunciation. Okay, all of these things, they look like too much, but if followed better, if followed properly while you write, if you see them properly once. So when does this happen? You look into all these issues after you have written whatever you want to write. So this happens in the editing stage. whatever I'm telling you belongs to the part of editing. If you are a native user, then this should come naturally to you. But even native users of English make these mistakes, because writing is a different game altogether. No matter how well you know English, even if you're a native speaker of the language, no matter how long your acquaintance has been with the language, after you write something, anybody who belongs to this category, no matter which one you are, you have to sit down and revise the work that you have done. So editing is quintessential to everybody. It is not something that is applicable only to the non-native speakers. Even if you're a native speaker, you will have to look down. You have to sit down and look at all these things to ensure that what you have written is clear and well written. Okay. So all these things that I'm telling you, they will usually happen at the editing stage, which means you'll first write down whatever you want, and then when you sit down to improve them, edit them, basically, these things that I'm telling you can be looked for. Okay, so that makes your writing better. All right, so is that understood, this part about end weight principle, how we have shifted longer structures to the end in order to make the sentence clear? Yes, no? Response?
It's pretty much clear now.
Okay, right. So let's move on then. Now, the first part that we looked at was end weight principle to achieve clarity. The second part is misplaced expression. Now, this is also very, very important. It's also something that everybody, okay, with no bar, native speaker, non-native speaker, whoever, bilinguals, anything. This is something that happens to all of us. What is that? Misplacing the expressions. Just have a look at the sentences that you have on the screen and tell me if you were prone to such mistakes. Have you noticed or have you found yourself doing these mistakes? Okay, committing these mistakes, I mean. Look at those sentences. Have a quick read through them. Take 1 minute and tell me if this is a very common mistake that you have gauged in your writing. Just read them. Take 1 minute and read them. Just look at the first 4 set, okay? Don't have to look at the 5th one as of now. Just look at the 4 sets that you have in the beginning. Yes? So, are you prone to these mistakes? Have you seen yourself making these mistakes while you write? I have seen several writing samples with these problems, and I'm sure I myself, if I look into my writing, I can detect these problems with my writing as well, which is why I told you, no matter what your levels are, maybe, at a very advanced stage, when you become a very seasoned writer, a seasoned author, and you become a seasoned author, nobody knows when, right? No one knows how many articles or books it might take for you to reach that stage. Sometimes we never reach to, okay, but that's all right. Even the greatest of the writers will require a proofreader before they, editor and a proofreader before they can get their books on the shelf, right? So these things are a part and parcel of all of us, but this is a very common error. At least I found this in every other writing samples that I've seen. And the ones that I've written myself, the ones that I've read for friends and everybody, for students and everyone. Misplaced expressions. Now, the first one, immediately afterwards, I remembered having met her. I remembered having met her immediately afterwards. Okay. So, of course, the second one is the correct one in all of the cases, right? He had not realized how slim she had become before he saw her. Before he saw her, he had not realized how slim she had become. That's the right one. They knew what I meant quite well. They knew quite well what I meant. That's the right way to write it. She told him that it was all a joke in a calm voice. She told him in a calm voice that it was all a joke. That's the right one, right? Now, why is it right? Okay. That is more important to us than which one is right. Just knowing which one is right is not really the point, because of course you cannot, these are just 4 constructions. There can be several other constructions in the language, and every time you cannot have a rearrangement like this. By which I mean you cannot sit down and you cannot by heart these. So, but why? If the second part, the second section in each of the sentences is the right one, why is it right and why is the first one wrong? Or rather, what is the way to figure this thing out? How do we know where to place these things? Because, if I had not given you these, if I hadn't told you that the second one is right, for some people at least, they would say even, the first one looks okay to me. They knew what I meant quite well, also looks fine to me. She told him that it was all a joke in a calm voice, also looks nice to me. Why is it wrong? Why is it, why do you think it doesn't give better clarity? Why do you say that this is not clear? This sounds clear to me, right? So why do you think how do you understand that the second one is the right one? Any idea? Any guesses on your part? If anybody wants to respond? No, just a free hit before I tell you what it is. So no books will tell you these things, okay? If you go to common mistakes in English and grammar or anything you want, all you would see is that, see, this is not the right way to write it. This is the right construction. Even the book that I have used these examples from, this tells you this, that, hey, this is the way you write, and but this is the actual way to write it. That's it. They won't tell you why it is. The thought behind why something is right or wrong is not explained. It's just told you that this is right and this is wrong. But then we need to know why it is wrong in order to not commit this mistake again, right? Every time you cannot go back to a textbook to see if it is right or wrong. And it is not possible. With infinite number of possible sentences in English, you cannot check each of them separately. Any guesses? Why do you think the second part is correct? The second among each set is right. Any response? Yes.
Is that more direct?
Direct in the sense? Can you explain? What do you mean by direct?
Rather than going a roundabout way of saying.
So, yeah, that's here the problem is not about roundabout. It's a very small sentence. No, how much roundabout can you make it? Immediately afterwards, I remembered having met her is a very short sentence. So this might look like that to you, but would you have understood it if I had not given all these things? If I had just given you the 4 sentences, immediately afterwards, I remembered having met her. They knew what I meant quite well. She told him, without the other set of sentences, would you have told me the same thing?
And not really.
Not really, right? Yeah. So that is what I'm trying to get to you. All right. So
sometimes converting a mother language into so many other languages brings about these kind of.
True. That's right. But what I'm telling you is that this is what we want to believe. We would like to believe that, see, this is my mother tongue influence that is causing these problems, which is why I told you these are mistakes that you would find even amongst native speakers, even the ones who have not spoken any other language except English from their birth, or something that they are only familiar with is English. Even if they are from America or England or whichever place which prominently uses English, you will find such mistakes in their documents as well.
Can we say it is because the subject is not appearing in the beginning?
No. This is nothing about positioning. It is more about actually a logic, right? I'll tell you. Okay, if there are no more guesses, if anybody wants to guess, fine. Otherwise, I'm going to tell you what exactly what I had figured, because that book did not explain this. And I thought for a while, why would they say that this is a wrong construction? Because, prima facie, to me, this doesn't look wrong. I'm like, fine, I get the meaning very clearly. But looks like it can fade away the meaning. So any more guesses? If not, then I'll tell you what I had understood, okay? So see, look at this sentence. He had not realized how slim she had become before he saw her, or they knew what I meant quite well. Now look at what has been replaced. They replaced quite well from the end, and they have placed it after the verb knew, right? They knew quite well what I meant. They knew what I meant quite well has been changed to they knew quite well what I meant. She told him that it was all a joke in a calm voice. In a calm voice has been placed after she told him, right? So what I understand is that, look at the phrase quite well. Knowing well, right? So that part of the part quite well fits better with the verb know than the other part, what I meant, right? Similarly, if you look at the fourth one, in a calm voice would fit better with the verb told than the other one. She told him in a calm voice sounds logically better than saying she told him, she told him that it was all a joke in a calm voice, right? Telling is more connected to the voice part than the joke. Yeah, that is the thing that I have been able to find out. What do you think? Do you agree with me, or do you have anything else to add to that?
Could be.
Could be. Still could be. If it is, so what else it can be? If not what I've told you. Yeah, anybody else who wants to respond to that? Because that sound logically much better to me than, because the connection between the voice and telling was much better, was a better connection than between voice and the joke. Okay, or the connection between knowing something well was a better connection than what was meant and what was, how it was told, right? By well is basically an adverb. Okay, so it has to modify the verb and not the other part, even otherwise.
So we can say this is about agreement of the verb.
Not agreement of the verb. That's what I'm saying. It's more about a logical thing, right? You need to think it in that way. Will I connect this to the joke, or will I connect this with the performance part? So yeah, you can say verb. Look at the verb closely and see which part the verb is trying to highlight in all the cases. So look at the first sentence. Can you guys try with the first sentence and let me know? Since I did both the third and fourth for you. First and second, if one of you can try and tell me why that has been replaced. I remembered having met her immediately afterwards. Is a better sentence, a clearer sentence than immediately afterwards I remembered having met her. So basically you need to draw a connection between immediately, remembering, and meeting. And in the second one, it is he had not realized. So it has to be between the realization, her becoming slim, and the guy seeing her. Okay, connections needs to be drawn between these things. Anything in the chat? No. Okay. Yeah, are you able to do that? Which one do you think is immediately connected to remembering or meeting? Immediately afterwards, I remembered having met her.
We met her.
Yeah, right. Because it's only after the meet that this guy, the second in sequence, first is meeting and then remembering, right? So that the phrase then has to go in hand with meeting than with remember. Okay, that's what I meant by logical connections. Every connection that you make whether sequential or otherwise, Has to be based on the logic. What happened first? Meeting happened first and then happened the remembering. So this needs to go with the verb meet. Okay, that's what I told you. This is more about your logical conclusions than about grammar as such. Okay, so grammar here again then is based on, the arrangement is based on what happened logically. Where can you draw a better logical connection? Right, and what about the second statement? He had not realized how slim she had become before he saw her. Before he saw her, he had not realized how slim she had become. Are people responding and I'm not seeing? Okay, so see, I had just given you a method to look at these things. You can think about it. You will definitely receive these slides. So look at these sentences carefully and ask yourself this question. But I hope the part which I wanted to tell you is clear to you. Okay, if not, then you can. Sure, Manishrita, you can go, no problem. I hope the part which I have been discussing with you is clear to you, but then have a look at them at a later, whenever you get the slides, and watch this closely. Okay. If there is anything that goes out of tune with what has been explained, you can come back and ask, because as of now, this looks like the most possible explanation to me. Okay. All right. Now, if I move on, look at the sentence now, the fifth set. I told them again the meeting had been postponed. Okay. I again told them the meeting had been postponed. I told them the meeting had again been postponed. Now both of them are correct sentences. Okay. Guys, ignore if you find a missing full stop or comma and all in places. This can happen while you type out. So leave that aside, but the rest of the thing is okay. Both the sentences 5A and 5B, they are right. Okay, but what's the difference? So which means there are expressions that can be used at multiple places. In previous examples, we're looking at expressions that could only happen at that particular place and nowhere else in the sentence. But now we are looking at an expression like again, which can be used in two different places, as you see in 5A and 5B. I again told them the meeting had been postponed. I told them the meeting had again been postponed. Okay, two different places.
Is there a different meaning? Like
Yes,
I see
yes.
I told them the meeting had again been postponed. Hence, the meeting has been postponed for the second time.
Right.
While in the earlier sentence, it shows that you have repeated that statement that the meeting has been postponed.
Right. Right. So placing certain expressions, when placed in different places, they are going to occupy different meanings. Okay, the same thing will happen. The most notorious word to cause this kind of problems in English, not problems, but then multiple meanings, is the word only. You place the word only at different places, and every time you shift the position, you get a different meaning with only. Okay, this is a good exercise for you. If you have time, you can have a look at this. Take a sentence, add the word only to it. Okay, place it at different positions. You will see every time you place it at a different position, you will have different meanings. Okay, with again, maybe only these two meanings are possible. With only, you will have multiple meanings. Okay, you can try doing this thing on your own. Okay, it's a very interesting thing to find out. Place it only in different places in the sentence, and you will see every time you place it differently, you will have different meaning. Okay, but your answer is right. So in both the sentences 5A and 5B, the usage of again gives you different meaning. In the first one, it is about the person having repeated the fact that the meeting has been postponed, and the second one is about the meeting itself being postponed for the second time, right? In both the cases, you have different meanings. Right, so that's on misplaced expressions. The third one, okay, the third method to bring about clarity is rephrasing of abstract nouns with adjectives or verbs. We'll dive straight into the examples for better understanding. Since the decriminalization of public drunkenness, now this is your abstract noun, people have been avoiding Broadway Park where drunks have been congregating, right? So what you can do is you can change this abstract noun into an adjective or a verb to make it clearer. Since it is no longer a crime to be drunk in public, people have been avoiding Broadway Park where drunks have been congregating. That's a better way of writing to achieve clarity. If the fox population were not controlled by the fox hunting method, other techniques would have to be employed. Now this is a general thing. Now, fox hunting in itself, it says that it's a method, so you don't have to write method again. So avoid using that. So you can rewrite your sentences: if the fox population were not controlled by fox hunting, other techniques would have to be employed, right? Afreen, yes, you can. If you have stats class, please. So that is the second example. The first example was of the abstract noun, drunkenness changed to an adjective or verb. The second example, you have the fox hunting method. Now, fox hunting in itself carries the meaning of being a method, so you don't have to write method as such again, because it does not add anything to the sentence. It just makes it redundant. So you can push that out. The last sentence, I went to see a saving private Rayan in spite of the fact that, now this words like fact, people have a tendency to overuse them, okay, and make things look redundant while they speak and write, okay. One such word is the word fact. So you can avoid that. Like in the sentence, you don't have to use that whole big phrase in spite of the fact. You can replace that with a simpler conjunction like even though. Okay, I went to see Saving Private Ryan even though I dislike war films, right? That's the third method. That is rephrasing of abstract nouns with adjectives or verbs. Sure. People who have classes can leave, okay? No problem. The fourth one is too many modifiers, especially of the noun phrase. Now, this itself is not a problem, but sometimes this can cause an ambiguity, okay? Like Indian history teachers. So in this context, it is understood that we are talking about teachers who teach Indian history, but there can be phrases where it becomes really longer and it can get ambiguous. But in general, it is always better to split such noun phrases with more than one modifier, with the help of a preposition like this, teachers of Indian history, to avoid any kind of ambiguity that can creep in, okay? So Indian history teachers, it is better to write teachers of Indian history than saying Indian history teachers. Basically, do not club too many modifiers together is what we mean, okay? Fifth process is subordination. Subordination basically means split a very long sentence into parts, okay? Either you split them open into different phrases, or you can split them into different sentences as well. Like the example here on the screen, because many minor revisions, first of all, the sentence begins with a because. In formal writing, this is not very appreciated as well, to begin your writing with a conjunction like because. Not wrong, but not appreciated, not considered a good writing practice, okay? Because many minor revisions were still required in the second draft of the document, contact with individual committee member was made by phone or letter, as the committee had been dissolved by the board and was soon to be replaced by an entirely new committee made up of members from a different department within the university. A very, very lengthy sentence with several things taking place in between. So there are several, which means there are multiple verbs and multiple actions. So you can split them open. Like you see in the revised part, that is, many minor revisions were still required in the second draft of the document. Committee members were individually contacted by phone or letter for their views on the draft, since the committee had been dissolved by the board. That becomes one part. That idea goes together. Why were they contacted individually by phone or letter? Because it had been dissolved by the board, right? So that goes together. And then the last part, an entirely new committee was soon to be formed, consisting of members from a different department within the university. Much clearer than the previous one, where all of them have been put together. All of them have been clubbed together, right? It was very difficult to tease out meaning out of it properly. You ideally will have to read it multiple times to know what it meant. But the second one looks far more well written than the first one. All right. So these are the ones involved in. One second, just give me a moment. I want this. Okay. Right. So you had 5 of them here with respect to achievement of clarity. The first one was end weight, right? Placing the longer structures at the end. The second one was misplaced expression. The third was rephrasing of abstract nouns with adjectives or verbs. Fourth was avoiding too many modifiers with the noun phrase. Fifth was subordination. Now, this one, parallelism, we had already discussed this while we were discussing style before. But I would like to draw your attention particularly to some kind of constructions, right? So this could not be something that you have come across before, but I want you to have a look at this, these sentences to understand what we mean by faulty parallelisms, right? We had looked at a couple of them while we were discussing the examples in the previous session, but these are more examples to that. And these are unfamiliar examples, I'm sure, or maybe you have seen them, but you might have not paid attention to it. So let's look at the sentences. The first one, they discontinued the production of the paint because the results of the field tests were unsatisfactory and a lack of interested customers. Okay, so what are the two things that they have tried to keep in parallel? The results of the field tests were unsatisfactory and a lack of interested customers. Now, while we were discussing parallelism, I had told you that the grammatical structures for the two parts that you are placing in a parallel should be the same, right? In this case, the two parallels we are trying to use is the field tests were unsatisfactory. The results of the field test were unsatisfactory and a lack of interested customers. So what happens in the first parallel segment here is a clause and the second one is a noun phrase. Now this cannot happen. If you have to use a parallel structure, either both of them have to be a phrase or both of them have to be a clause, right? Like remember I told you, if you're using a to infinitive to represent, to write, then every parallel should follow that same structure. You can't write to represent at one place and then the next parallel cannot have writing an ing form. So that consistency needs to be maintained. In this case, again, the first parallel segment used is a clause, second one is a phrase. That cannot happen. Either you change both of them to a phrase or you change both of them to a clause. So an improved version, you can see below, they discontinued the production of the paint because the results of the field tests were unsatisfactory and there was a lack of interested customers, right? So what did they do? They changed the noun phrase in the original sentence, a lack of interested customers, to a clause, right? There was a lack of interested customers. So now you have two parallel structures, both of them which are clauses. They're grammatically similar structures and now the problem is solved. Or alternatively, you can also change both of them into phrases, right? Like the second option, they discontinued the production of the paint because of the unsatisfactory results of the field test and a lack of interested customers. So the results of the field tests were unsatisfactory. That was the original construction in the sentence. That is changed to a phrase, this unsatisfactory results of the field test. And now you have both of the parallel structures as a phrase. So that problem is solved. So this is basically the idea of parallelism. Whatever you are using as a parallel segment, you have to ensure that the segments are similar in grammatical relation, right? If one is a clause, the other has to be a clause. If one is a phrase, the other two also has to be a phrase. Cannot be a clause and a phrase, right? Now, another example, you will find long queues in the bookstore and to pay your tuition, right? So one is a prepositional phrase in the bookstore and the other is an infinitive clause to pay your tuition. That cannot happen in a parallel structure. So you change, what did you do in the corrected sentence? You will find long queues in the bookstore and at the cashier. You changed both the parallel structure into a prepositional phrase in the bookstore and at the cashier. Okay. Other examples, the color of her hair, look of self-assurance, and the aristocratic bearing match those in the painting of the beautiful woman staring from the wall of the living room. Okay. Determiner in the third unit, but not in the second. So if you're using a determiner for the third unit, then you have to use it for the second unit also. The first determiner, the used is for a different reason. That has got nothing to do with the parallel structure, right? So, which means you can rewrite this sentence as the color of her hair, the look of self-assurance, and the aristocratic bearing, wherein both the second unit and the third unit, that is the look of self-assurance and the aristocratic bearing, both of them have a determiner. Okay. Or else what you can do, you can remove the determiner from the third one as well in the original sentence. So then you can rewrite it as the color of her hair, look of self-assurance, and aristocratic bearing. So you removed the from both. You removed the from aristocratic bearing, and so you can write look of self-assurance and aristocratic bearing. But if you're keeping the with the aristocratic bearing, then you also have to retain it for look of self-assurance, right? Just to create the parallel structure. Then the fourth one is his collages derive from both art and from popular culture. How can you correct it? His collages derive from both art and popular culture, right? Or his collages derive both from art and from popular culture. From art and from popular culture. Okay. Better one. Oh, sorry. What happened? Okay, now this one. I prefer the novels of Hemingway to Faulkner. That is a faulty construction. You can change it to I prefer the novels of Hemingway to those of Faulkner. Now, why can you not write? Why is the first sentence wrong? I prefer the novels of Hemingway to Faulkner, because see, you are trying I prefer, and then it follows with the novels of Hemingway to Faulkner. So the novels of Hemingway needs to be compared to the novels of Faulkner, right? You cannot compare novels of Hemingway and then Faulkner. Faulkner is the writer. So to maintain the parallel structure, you either write it as I prefer the novels of Hemingway to those of Faulkner. So adding those of makes the second part as referring to the novels of Faulkner. Or you can alternatively write it as I prefer Hemingway to Faulkner. So here the comparison is between two authors. The previous sentence, the comparison is between the novels of the two authors. So in any case, comparisons have to be between constructions in which you draw parallels between two comparative structures. The comparative structures have to be similar. Like, you know, there is a common saying, no? People often say that do not compare apples with oranges, right? So that's the same principle applied here. So whenever you're comparing, make sure your units are same. Another example. The lung capacity of non-smokers exposed to tobacco smoke in offices is measurably less than non-smokers in smoke-free offices. What is the problem here? Initially, you're talking about the capacity of non-smokers. Then you're talking about the smokers themselves, non-smokers themselves. So these are two different units. They cannot be compared. So you can rewrite this as the lung capacity of non-smokers exposed to tobacco smoke in offices is measurably less than that of. So that of, adding the phrase that of makes the second part referring to the capacity than the non-smokers themselves. Okay, so now the problem is solved. The last example in this one, if the cost of raw materials keeps rising, the more manufacturers will raise their price. Now, the initial part you are talking about the cost, and the second part you're talking about the price. So how do you rewrite it? The more the cost of raw materials rises, the more manufacturers will raise it. So comparison needs to be the same, right? So you add more to the second part in order to show that we are comparing the price with the cost, as in the price of the product with the cost of the raw materials. Okay, gives better clarity. Or you can alternatively write it as if the cost of raw materials keep rising. So this is the construction where you have completely removed the word more in order to avoid confusion. Okay, if you're using more with the first part, then you have to use more with the second part as well. Or like in the sentence, in the last sentence, you can completely remove more and then write a sentence like, if the cost of raw materials keeps rising, manufacturers will raise their prices. Okay, right. So this is about parallelism. We had looked at very limited examples of parallelism in the previous session. So I thought giving you a few examples would help you understand better what parallelism means. Okay. I think that's understood. If you haven't, you can ask questions now. Okay. Is that understood? If yes, please, you can respond in the chat. Otherwise, you can ask your doubts too in the chat.
Yes, ma'am. I
Yeah.
understood it.
Understood?
But, yes, ma'am. Understood. But in the fourth line, can we also write it like I prefer Hemingway over Faulkner? Can I use over instead of to?
Yeah, that is possible. Parallelism doesn't refer to those things. Parallelism is between two segments that you want to draw parallels between. So over is not making any difference to it. No, so you use over or to, or you use than, anything is okay there. Okay, I prefer Hemingway than Faulkner will also be okay. So there are multiple words which can replace the word to there. But my parallelism is not dependent on that. Parallelism is about what structures you use otherwise, right? So is that understood to you? Why you cannot write I prefer Hemingway to that you understood, right? So that is the major part in parallelism. So of course, the words that you use to write these things can definitely be, I mean, there can be more than one way to write it, definitely. Okay.
Because the problem here is, no, what I found different here is most of these sentences you introduced today in that 1A, 2, 2A, 3, 3B, in those sentences, I didn't even find it as a fault. Okay, I have been doing the same thing.
You mean the misplaced expressions, no?
Misplaced expressions.
Right. Yeah.
Because that's the way I have been talking and writing. And most of the places where I have seen people are using the same. So
right.
Maybe we are doing that, just it is going very, it is like more grammatical. People are not into the more grammatical way and using.
Right, exactly. So somebody just mentioned, no, that I think she's not here anymore. Manaswita, I think, mentioned that, we have a habit of transliterating things from our language into English, and some of them sound...
Even in our native language also, I don't think we go that much grammatical into things. We just, I form the phrase.
You know why? Because there are differences between the way languages are constructed. Most probably, I cannot comment on that because, I do not know what language you speak. But some of the Indian languages are, I mean, at least the one that I speak, they are a little lenient on things like this. The word order, some of the languages have a free word order. Right. So they do not really give a lot of importance to what comes first. But in English, these things are very important. Like in English, you cannot have the subject placed at the end. It has to be SVO always. Like if you say a sentence like, I'm going home, you have to say I'm going home. You can't say home going I. That's a wrong sentence in English, right? But if you look at a few of the Indian languages, that is a possible construction. Right. I go home. You can reverse the order and still make sense out of it. But in English, if you do the same, it makes no sense. It's just a bad sentence. It's a wrong sentence. So these kind of differences exist between languages. So in writing or in speaking, particularly, English is a highly structure-driven language. It has to follow these rules. Okay. And you find this problematic because, as you mentioned, this is how we have been using it. And we've been thinking this is the right way to do it all this while. Now we see suddenly that this is not. So that's the problem. And trust me, the things that we're discussing now is something that is a common error to everybody who writes. Okay. Ask anybody, which is why I mentioned, I don't know if you were around, I said even the most seasoned of the authors will commit these errors, which is why...
Yes, ma'am, I was that. Actually, what I thought there was, maybe they are doing it when it comes to the movies, or I don't read novels. I watch a lot of movies and series based on the tone, whether it was a sitcom or a thriller one. They rephrase the sentences.
This part you are telling
just
me,
to manipulate
the spoken language. Spoken language is way more forgiving than the written language. Okay, they allow that kind of aberrations because the person is there You can clarify it with them even if you do not. But in the case of written documents, no, that's not possible. This is something that is documented, which is read by multiple people. It could be, right? So in that case, you demand maximum clarity possible from the author, because you cannot every time you find an ambiguity, you cannot call up the author and ask, what did you mean by this? That is not allowed in writing. But in speaking, you have that leeway, you have that way out. So which is why I told you, spoken languages, by which I mean conversational English, or for that matter, any other language, will be way more lenient. It will be much more forgiving than your written one. Written is it's very strict. You have to follow the norms properly. Otherwise, you can get into trouble. Okay. That could be the reason, right? So, okay.
Yes,
so your point on whether you can use over or anything else is, I would say, yes, that's not a problem. But your attention should be more on how to construct parallel structures. Okay. What goes for parallel. Okay. So I think that part is understood. If that is understood, then we are done. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
So we'll go to the last part. This is the last slide. Yes. So the last rubric that I would like to discuss with you. Before I go to consistency, in this one, I had not included that part in the slide because I thought there's nothing much to be added as a slide. I just wanted to tell, in terms of clarity, when you're writing a sentence, also make sure that you don't write similar sounding words together. Okay. Now, what do I mean by that? Sometimes you have a tendency to write things like, like look at a sentence like this. The television show showed how coal was mined in the United States. What did I do here? The television show showed how coal was mined in the United States.
We are still seeing the last faulty. That Hemingway and Faulkner.
No, not that. This is a different point. I'm trying to talk about a different point. That is over. Parallelism is over. I've discussed that with you.
No, still we are seeing that slide only, ma'am.
That's what I'm saying. I have not included this in the slide because I thought there is nothing to be written as such in the slides. That's why. Something that I wanted to generally discuss, that while we talk about clarity, if you have a sentence like the television show showed how coal was mined in the United States, what do you find striking in this sentence? The television show showed how coal was mined in the United States.
The same point you have made, like two similar words or
two similar sounding words, right? Show and show.
Use add something like that.
Exactly. So you can replace the one that is possible to replace. Of course, you cannot. Usually what you can do is, in such cases, the nouns cannot be usually changed. What you can do is you can play around with the verb. You can change the verb to something else in order to make it sound a little less redundant or clearer, right? So in this case, you can change the verb showed to demonstrated or, yeah, what? Sorry?
No, the television show add the program, something like that.
Right. So the point is, it is usually impossible to change the, not impossible, it is better that you change the verb. Okay, in such cases, when you find similar sounding words or sometimes the same word used side by side, you can change the verb to a better version and then rewrite your sentence. So avoid writing sentences like these as well, where you use the same word or similar sounding words side by side. Okay, that was one part that I wanted to talk about clarity. Now that's done. So we'll talk about the last part, which is clarity. Okay. Sorry, consistency. Okay, this is the last one. Now, in terms of consistency, two things. One is we have very well heard about the subject-verb agreement, right? So subject usually can be what? Can be noun or pronoun. We usually talk about nouns in the case of agreement, but remember, even if your subject is a pronoun, it needs to agree with your verb, right? So people take special care when it comes to nouns, but what happens, a lot of people go wrong when we are using pronouns as subjects, right? So that's one thing about consistency. Maintain the consistency. In case of pronoun consistency, what we mean is, please ensure that your pronoun agrees with your verb, like you would do it for a noun. Like, just to quickly show you an example, get a university map because they really help, right? People have a tendency to not take these things into consideration. They use one thing and they goof up with the pronoun. They use a different pronoun. Instead of writing it, they write they. So get a university map because it really helps, right? So it is not just your noun, but also the pronoun which needs to agree with the verb, right? In case you have one in the sentence, right? Another example, a manager should consider several factors when determining how they will deal with inefficient employees. No, the usage of they is wrong. Either you change that they, or what you can do is you can change the first part, like you can change the manager to managers. Okay, managers should consider several factors when determining how they will deal with inefficient employees. That is the correct method to write this one. If you plan to change they, that is, if you want to change to a manager should consider several factors when determining how he will deal with inefficient employees, make sure that you add something like an adjective to the word manager. A good manager should consider several factors when determining how he will deal with inefficient employees. Okay, if you are to change the first part, then it is better that you change a manager to managers. But if you are planning to change the pronoun part, then it is better that you add an adjective before the word manager, like a good manager. Why we do that is because usually for generalization, when you want to generalize something, the preferred method is to use a plural. But if you're using a singular form, then what happens, like in the case of a good manager, we are trying to draw a generalization, but here what we are doing is we are referring to one among the whole class. Like a good manager means you are referring to one person among the whole class. In such case, you will have to specify what kind of manager you're talking about. So a good manager or a smart manager, that does the job better. That does a better job of generalization than writing a manager. But to avoid all of this, the better way is to pluralize it so that you achieve two things. One, you can generalize it better. Second, you don't have to get confused with the pronouns as well. Is that part understood? Okay. The better part is to pluralize it. Okay, that gives a better sounding generalization. Okay, but in case you want to generalize it using a singular noun, like if you want to keep a manager, then you will have to add an adjective to it, a good manager, right? That will make it a better sounding generalization than writing a manager, right? I hope that point is understood. It's not very important to the point that I'm making here, but I told you just, for your information, because even that is also a part of writing, right? How to write generalizations is also one important part in that, though not very directly connected to what we are discussing today. Okay. Right. So that is the first part, pronoun agreement. And the second one is tense agreement. This one you would have always heard. Okay. So something that every teacher will tell you, every teacher who has ever taught you writing will tell you, you need to maintain consistency in your tense. If you have begun with past tense, please continue writing in past tense. Do not mix up all the tenses together, right? Like in the sentence, although I worked until midnight, I can't finish all my assignments. What will you do? Since you use past tense for work, you will have to convert your can or cannot to couldn't, right? If you had written in present tense, then you could have maintained the can. But in this case, since the first one used as a past tense, you will change the other one also to past tense. So although I worked until midnight, I couldn't finish all my assignments. Okay. Second sentence, if you had gone to the bookshop before, again past tense, before the term started, you would be able to buy all your course books, should be changed to you would have been able to buy all your course books. Is that understood? Tense agreement or tense consistency? Yes
Yes,
or no?
ma'am. Understood.
Yes,
Yes,
right.
ma'am. Understood.
So two things under consistency, pronoun consistency and tense consistency. In both the cases, basically what you're meaning is please make them agree to what is available, right? In the case of pronoun, make them agree with the verb. In the case of tense, maintain the tense throughout. Do not change midway through. Okay. Now, there are certain documents which demands you to use only a particular kind of tense that we will talk about when we take those things specifically, right? Like some of them would tell you, please write only in past tense, do not use present tense. Or some of them will tell you, do not use present tense, write it in, or do not use past tense, please maintain a present tense. So those specifications we'll look at when we take up them next week. So I don't know if you guys who are still here have heard it. So this is the last class we are going to be talking about the know-hows of writing, right? We're going to stop it. We've discussed enough of the style and basically the craft and process of writing. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take up specific things in the next class. So we'll have a slightly longer session for the next week. I plan to talk on letter writing and email writing for the next class. Okay, so in the remaining 2 weeks that we have, we are going to take up those since we have finished talking about how to do it and see how we can implement a couple of these things in the writing of those things. Okay, so that's all for today. I hope you have followed the session well. The slides would be uploaded very soon. Please have a look at them, and if you have any doubts, you can get back to me in the next class. Okay, if you do not have any more doubts, then we can close the session. Any doubts?
For me, no doubt. Thank you.
No
Thank you for
doubts.
taking the class. Okay.
Okay, so we can close the session for today. Okay, I'll meet you in the next class.
Okay, ma'am. Okay. Thank you,
Right?
ma'am.
Yeah, thank you so much.